1800s, there was this company that went public. I have their symbol on the back of my computer, and I bet you have something in your house that has this same symbol. Do you have anything with this symbol right here, the Apple symbol? Do any of you have something with that symbol right there? Because if you do, right, you own a little bit of Apple product, right? At one time was the most valuable company in the world. I don't know if it still is. I don't check it daily. But I want to ask you, if I went back to the 1900s and the day I graduated from high school and I started investing in Apple way back then, what would my investment be worth today? What profit would I get? So that's the profit is what I've made minus what I've put in. So I put in a bunch of money. All right. So let's say I invest $1 every month. How much profit do you think I'd have? It's actually not as much as you think. Just $1 a month is only $12 a year, right? So I'd end up with what? I would end up with about $8,100 in profit right now, which isn't bad for $12 a year, right? To get $8,000. But is that life-changing money? No. It might be if you're 14, but if you're a dad like me, that's not life-changing money. It's good to have, and you can probably buy your 16-year-old daughter a new phone with $8,000. All right. But if you up your investment to $1 a week, then you're going to have somewhere around $28,000. Now, that's way better. I've invested a little bit more, and so I get a better profit. Again, it's not life-changing money. It will help, absolutely. I'll probably be able to pay for my daughter's college, but it's not life-changing money. Okay, let me increase my investment to $1 a day. That means I'm going to end up with about $150,000 in profit. Now, that's a really good return, right? Like that, they're all the same return, but that to me is like, okay, I've really, I invested and I got a significant increase out of this. Would it change my whole life? Probably not. Would it? Yeah, I'd probably just keep investing it, right? It's good, but it's not great. If I really want it to be great, if I really want this investment to change my life, I have got to invest a lot every day. And so I invest $100 every day and I end up with $15.5 million. Now, is that life-changing money? That is life-changing money. That's where you get to say, I am changing my career. I'm going to go do other things. I'm going to buy a different house. I'm going to buy different cars, whatever you want. That is life-changing money right there. So what do we learn? We learn that if you want to increase your profit, you have to increase your investment. Say that to the person next to you. If there's someone next to you, if there's no one next to you, just tell the Holy Ghost. If you want to increase your profit, you must first what? You must first increase your investment. Now, I want to show you a scripture in Mosiah. King Benjamin is talking to his sons, and he says, my sons, search the scriptures diligently that you may profit thereby. Now, do you see that word profit right there? That you may profit thereby. So what do we know about investments and profit, though? We just said it. If we want to profit from the scriptures, we must first what? We must first invest in them. So I wrote that right next to my scriptures. If I want to profit from the scriptures, I must first invest in them. And so I try to every day take time to invest in the scriptures. And some people don't invest very much. And so they profit just a little bit, right? They read the scriptures once a month, right? And they're going to get profit. Is it life-changing profit? I don't know. What if I read every week, every Sunday, I read the scriptures? That's going to profit you even more. Life-changing? Maybe, right? Once a day, right? But if I really invest every day, then that's when that profit becomes life-changing. Does that make sense? One thing I always ask my students at BYU is, do you see the Book of Mormon as a souvenir or a tool? Souvenirs are great. I have a lot of souvenirs in my house. And what are they? A souvenir is something that sits on the shelf and it represents something, right? It represents a trip I had. It represents a meaningful experience in my life. I tell people about it because this was a great souvenir, right? In my garage, there's tools. And I don't keep them on a shelf. They're mostly just in drawers all over the place, right? Especially when my son gets in there. The tools are all over the floor and they are well used. Is your Book of Mormon a souvenir? Does it represent a good experience for you, right? Maybe a mission or your childhood. And so you're like, I love that book because of what it represents. And there's nothing wrong with a souvenir. But can the Book of Mormon become a tool? I love to see someone's scriptures that are well used, right? A well-used set of scriptures. That's what we're after. I think when the Book of Mormon changes from a souvenir to a tool in your life, that's when the investment changes. A souvenir you read every once in a while, you get a little bit from it, great. If that's your Book of Mormon, then good, right? It's better than not reading at all. But if you really want to have life-changing profit, you've got to use it like a tool. I want to see your Book of Mormon really well read. Now, how do you use it as a tool? I think the key to using the Book of Mormon as a tool is found in the introduction. There's a statement from Joseph Smith where he's talking about the Book of Mormon. And he was speaking at a priesthood meeting, and he says, I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't have any errors. Most correct of any book on earth doesn't mean it's error-free. That's not at all. Most correct means it'd be like you and I saying, that's the best book I've ever read, right? It's the most correct of any book on earth. It's just 1830s vernacular. The keystone of our religion, if you've been in seminary, you know the keystone holds the arch up, right? If the Book of Mormon's true, then Joseph Smith's a prophet, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is God's kingdom on the earth. It's the biggest deal since Jesus was here. If the Book of Mormon's not true, then it's a nice religion that does some good for people. So it all hinges on this book. And then lastly, this is the part I wanted you to see. And a man or a woman, he was in priesthood meeting, a man or a woman would get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than by any other book. Now, notice what Joseph Smith doesn't say. He doesn't say you get near to God by reading the Book of Mormon. He says you get near to God by abiding by its precepts. Now, that's different than reading. I could read the Book of Mormon and never live a single principle, and I wouldn't get any nearer to God. So how do we get nearer to God through the Book of Mormon? What 4 words? Abiding by its precepts, or in our language, living its principles. The part of the problem is, though, the principles are there. We just have a hard time finding them. It's like we said earlier, it's like a gold mine, and you think, I can't see anything. I went in there, I didn't see anything. So what I wanted to show you tonight is how you can kind of gold mine through scriptures in the Book of Mormon with your family or on your own and say, okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm really gonna look, and I'm gonna see what principles I can find, and then seek to live them, abide by them. Remember, you don't get nearer to God by just reading the principles or even finding the principles. You get nearer to God by living the principles in the Book of Mormon. So let's take the most read verse in the Book of Mormon. It's 1 Nephi chapter 1, verse 1. I think this one's been read 1,000 times more than the last verse, right? In Moroni chapter 10, because we all get started and we're like, okay, I'm going to read the Book of Mormon. Now, here's what it says. And I'm going to stop you when I see a principle. I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents. Stop. He's writing this 30 years after the fact. 30 years after the fact. What could he say? I, Nephi, builder of boats. I, Nephi, king of my people. I, Nephi, slayer of Laban. I, Nephi, record keeper. Instead, he says, I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents. So I wrote at the top of my scriptures, this was written 30 years after it happened. He could have written about visions. He could have written about the ship or becoming king, but he wrote about his parents. And I would say part of humility is the ability to recognize those who have helped you get where you are. So what would I do today? Instead of just keep reading, I'd be like, okay, hang on. Who has helped me get where I am? And I start to think of my own parents and siblings and especially my amazing wife and my incredible children. And I try to develop that sense of humility. Not that I need to. I'm the most humble person I know. My wife says I have an arrogancy problem. I don't. But do you see how this principle would help me if I did have a problem, right? That I start to look inside and say, okay, who's helped me? All right, let's keep going. Therefore, I was taught somewhat in all the learning of my father, and having seen many afflictions in the course of my days, nevertheless, having been highly favored of the Lord in all my days. Stop right there. I think I found a principle. Nephi talks about his afflictions, but he also talks about being highly favored of the Lord. So I highlighted both of those. Do you see that? He says, I have had many afflictions, but I feel very favored. Afflictions are like trials. Can you really have a lot of trials and yet feel very favored of the Lord? And so do you see what this principle might do for me? I might stop and go, okay, I've had a significant trial and I felt like God was mad at me or hated me or something. But here Nephi switches my way of thinking to, he feels very favored of the Lord, even though he's had a lot of afflictions. All right, we could talk a long time about that, but let's keep going. He says, yes, I've had a great knowledge of the goodness and the mysteries of God. So it seems to me, look at this next part, that Nephi is tying his trials to an understanding. I highlighted this, the goodness and the mysteries of God. It seems he's tying that to his afflictions. He's saying, because I've had these afflictions, I feel highly favored because in my afflictions, I've gotten to know God. Wow, there's a principle that I need to learn in my life, that when I'm going through great difficulty, I'm blessed here because I'm learning about God, and I'm going to turn to God in my trials. Lastly, he says, I make a record of my proceedings in my days. And I highlighted that and thought, you know what? The Lord expects us to write down the experiences he gives us. When I remember President Eyring saying that he tries to write every night in his journal how the Lord has blessed him in that day. Right? He said he wouldn't go to sleep until at least written a little bit about it. So let's go back to this verse. Do you see how this single verse contains a lot of principles that will what? If I live them, will help me get nearer to God. And that's just one verse. Could I do this with every single verse in the Book of Mormon? Then what would I have? I would have thousands upon thousands of principles that I still need to live. I don't get nearer to God by reading these great principles. I get nearer to God by saying, okay, what can I do to then abide by them, right? That's Joseph Smith's language. Or what can I do to incorporate them into my life? You know, when I sit down and read scriptures, I think sometimes my children see something scary. I was going through my genealogy the other day, and I found my great-great-grandfather. Can I show him to you? He's kind of a scary guy. When I saw him, I was like, whoa, okay. Sounds like he went through a nuclear holocaust or something, right? Like, what in the world happened to great grandpa Smith? And my wife came by and she said, that's got to be your grandfather. I mean, you look exactly alike. And I said, yeah, that's great. Very funny. And she said, just kidding. You know what you ought to do is just change your perspective. And she turned the photo on its side. So she turned it to its side and she said, now look at it for a second. And I stared at it. Now, if you look really closely, you're not going to see my great grandpa anymore. You are going to see a little dog laying down with his nose against his tail, and he's curled up. You might have to show the person next to you. Just go up to the screen and point it out to them. His eyes are closed. His nose is down. His little ears are right there, kind of, and his nose is right against his tail, and he's curled up like by a fireplace. Now go back to the way it was. If we go back to the way it was and it's right side up, right, you still see the dog. And then you go to the sideways one and it's easy to see. You're like, oh, some of you still haven't seen it, have you? You're like, yeah, I totally see it. I don't know what he's talking about. Now, to me, this can be, this is how my children versus I see the Book of Mormon. Sometimes I sit down with my kids to read the Book of Mormon. They're like, Dad, I don't want to. I want to play Zelda, right? And they see something kind of, like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to go through that. When I see it, I see a cute dog. I'm like, come here, Book of Mormon. You're so cute, little Book of Mormon. I love you, Book of Mormon, right? And the Book of Mormon's like, So what I have got to do is help people change their perspective, right? That's what you and I have to do, is say, look, there's things in here that can really bless your life, more so than any other book. Can I give you an example? So way back when I was teaching a bunch of teenagers, we were talking about the Book of Mormon, and a girl came up to me and she said, I think I found my favorite verse in the Book of Mormon. And I almost laughed out loud because it was a verse that I had not really liked all that much. It's First Nephi. And it's it's Second Nephi chapter 5, verse 16. It says, and I, Nephi, did build a temple, and I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built with so many precious things, because they weren't found on the land. Wherefore it could not be built like unto Solomon's temple. The construction was like unto Solomon's temple, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine. So what I really heard in this verse was Nephi saying, we built a temple. It was like Solomon's, except it wasn't, except it was. And I was like, Nephi, you're just going in circles here. And then she showed me this verse. She's like, I love this verse. And I said, oh, wow. In my mind, I'm like, have you read the others? Because this to me did not stand out as a major, like, oh, this verse is amazing. And then she showed me what she wrote by it. This is what she says. She said, don't compare yourself to others. Just do your best with what you have on your land. She noticed that Nephi said, I wanted to make it like Solomon's, but I just didn't have access to those type of things. So I did the best I could with what I had available to me. And I asked her, I said, why do you love this verse? And I knew a little bit of her background. I knew what she was going to say. She said, Brother Smith, I don't really have a good priesthood holding dad. She said, my dad's he's not even a nice person, right? There's plenty of dads are not priesthood holding dads, and they're great people and they're excellent fathers. But she said, he's not even a nice person. And she said, sometimes I find myself getting jealous of my friends who have great dads, or dads who can give them blessings, right? Or dads who serve in the church. And she said, this verse gives me comfort that that's just not on my land. It's not in my life. And so I just need to do the best I can with what's on my land. And that verse then becomes to her a gold mine. Can you see that? It becomes an absolute gold mine to her. Let me show you a comparison I did once in 1 Nephi 17 that really helps me. Nephi and Laman are speaking, and you've got Nephi describing the exact same experience as Nephi. Or sorry, you've got Nephi explaining the exact same experience as Laman. Now look how they describe it. It's the exact same circumstances, totally different description. Nephi, very excited. So great were the blessings of the Lord upon us, that while we did live upon raw meat in the wilderness, our women did give plenty of suck for their children. They were strong, even unlike unto the men. Oh, that's probably not a good thing to say in 2020. And they began to bear their journeyings without murmurings. That rhymed. Thus we see that the commandments of God must be fulfilled. If it so be the children of men keep the commandments of God, he nourishes them, he strengthens them, he provides means whereby they can accomplish the thing which he commanded them. He did provide means for us while we did sojourn in the wilderness. How does the wilderness sound to Nephi? If you're talking to Nephi, he's like, the wilderness, it's the best, right? I love it. Raw meat, love it. My wife, she's like a man. It's the best, right? He loves everything about the wilderness. Now look at how Laman describes the wilderness. He says, thou art like unto our father. Sorry, I do all the voices for my kids. It really helps them pay attention. This is Laman's voice. Thou art like unto our father. He's a smoker, led away by the foolish imaginations of his heart. He's led us out of Jerusalem. We have wandered in the wilderness. Our women have toiled, being big with child. They've borne children in the wilderness. They've suffered. They've suffered all things, save it were death. Now, how would you like your husband to say this to you? It would have been better that she had died before she came rather than coming out from Jerusalem. Can you imagine looking at her? Look at her, Nephi. It's better if she'd be better dead than looking like this, right? These many years we have suffered in the wilderness. We could have been happy. We could have enjoyed our possessions, right? Now look at those two and tell me what the principle is we might see. To me, I hope you see what I see, which is when you go through something, you have a choice. Two people can go through the exact same trial and experience it incredibly different, right? One can find joy in it. The other can find nothing but suffering. Now, I know some of you are like, no, that's not true because it's not my attitude. I feel that same way. You guys, when I have a really bad day, I want to blame the day, right? I want to blame, it's not me, it's the day, right? But maybe it's not a bad day. Maybe it's a bad me. Right? Can you imagine that as a commercial? It's not a bad day. It's you. A message from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter. No, you wouldn't do that. But do you see that sometimes our attitude and our perspective on our trials changes everything, the way we look at them? Look at Meg. When you hear Meg speak tonight, right? She could say, I hate this. This is miserable. I'm confined to a wheelchair. I'm a quadriplegic. And she could talk like Laman all day long. She'd be like, it'd be better if I had, if my hair had been chopped off. She could be a terrible Laman, right, attitude, but she's not. Meg Johnson sees her trials like Nephi does. She sees blessings. She's not faking it. She really sees blessings in these trials. All right, I'm taking too much of my time. The whole thing's mine. Okay, go to 2 Nephi 5. I want to show you something. Nephi says, we lived after the manner of happiness. So I'm going to search that chapter, and I'm going to look for what they did that made them so happy. What they do. And I noticed that 3 times in the chapter, bring them all up there, that 1, 2, 3, 3 times in the chapter, he says, we worked our land and we raised animals. We build buildings of iron and work, of wood and copper and brass and steel, and we labored with our hands. So you've got 3 verses in this chapter about happiness, all about hard work. I know some of you are like, no. Hard work is where happiness goes to die. No, it isn't. There is a principle here that if you want to be happy, you have to be involved in work, labor, right? Working hard. So when your parents say, hey, will you do the dishes? You got to be like, a chance to be happy. Yes. Hey, will you clean your room? Yes. Another chance to be happy. Thank you so much, Mom and Dad, for giving me all these chances to be happy. All right. Let me show you another one about happiness. It's in 4th Nephi. Same type of thing. I saw that Mormon wrote, there could not be a happier people among all the people who were created by the hand of God. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to do the same thing I did in 2 Nephi 5. I'm going to look for principles of happiness. And I noticed something. 4 different times it says there was no contention in the land. Let me show them to you. Verse 2, there was no contention in the land. Verse 13, there was no contention among the people. Verse 15, there was no contention because of the love of God, which was in the hearts of the people. And then 18, at the very end, there was no contention in all the land. So I might read 4 Nephi 1. I might mark all these points where it says there was no contention. And then I might say to myself, how am I going to reduce contention in my own life, in my family life, at work, or anywhere else, in my quarantined life? How am I going to reduce contention in my life? Right now, don't look at your sibling and be like, we'll just get rid of him. No. That's not how we get rid of contention, right? But how might you personally say, I don't need to be involved in so many fights? When I don't need to insult back, right? When someone's ornery or hangry and they say something mean, I don't need to say something back. Why? Because I want to be happy. And I know to be happy, I've got to reduce contention. How do I know that? The Book of Mormon told you. It's so amazing. All right, I got to show you a couple more things, and then I'm going to give the time back to Meg and John, and they'll have like 30 seconds each. All right, so I want to show you, I was reading in the Tree of Life dream the other day with Lehi, and it said that there were many people who tasted of the fruit, but then they fell away. And I thought, why? Why do people sometimes fall away? That's not good, right? Like, I don't want to be one of these people that tastes the fruit and then falls away. Well, I'm reading later in Alma 32, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, this sounds very familiar. Right? He talks about the fruit, which is sweet above all that is sweet, white above all that is white, and pure above all that is pure. And I was like, that's the exact same fruit in Lehi's dream. And then Alma says something that Lehi didn't say that I think adds to the dream. He says, look at the last 4 or 5 lines of Alma 32, verse 42. You shall feast upon this fruit till you're filled. Now go back to 1 Nephi 8:28. What had they done? They had tasted of the fruit, and they were ashamed. Alma says tasting is not enough. You can hear him saying, you can't just taste of the fruit. You have to feast on it. You have to feast on it until it's all you want, until that's all you care about, right? You picture Nephi at the tree, and he's like, eating fruit. He's getting ready to make Tree of Life jam and Tree of Life pie, and he's just eating the fruit. It's dripping down his face. And then he sees the building. And he sees the building, and his stomach's so full of fruit, and he loves the fruit. He's like, the fruit is the best, right? And he looks over, and the building's like, right, whatever they're doing, pointing at him. And he just doesn't care. He's like, do you want some fruit? Right? And they're like, and he goes, you don't want any fruit. Okay. And he goes back to eating fruit because he's feasted. He hasn't tasted. He hasn't tasted and gone, I don't know. He's feasted. All right. Let me show you. Go all the way to Mosiah 18. We'll finish there. In Mosiah chapter 18, Mormon makes a statement that just makes me laugh. He says that the story of Alma the elder baptizing all those people took place in the waters of Mormon. And then he says something about that place in Mosiah 18:30. He says, now it came to pass, all this is Alma the elder and the 200 people that were baptized, and they made new covenants, right? And they came to know their Redeemer. He's going to say that later. All this was done in Mormon, yea, by the waters of Mormon, in the forest that was near the waters of Mormon, the place of Mormon, the waters of Mormon, the forest of Mormon. You guys, how many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times in this verse, he says Mormon, right? And then he says, how beautiful are they? Do you see that word they? That's a pronoun. And the antecedent to that is waters of Mormon. So how beautiful are the waters of Mormon to the eyes of them who there came to the knowledge of their Redeemer. How blessed are they, for they shall sing his praise forever. I was looking at this verse and I realized something. And this is just Brother Smith, chapter 1, verse 1. So this is not the doctrine of the church. I'm not saying this is absolutely 100% true, but this is just Brother Smith saying, I think this is probably true. I'm going to go and ask Mormon about it one day. But when I look at Mosiah 18:30, it reminds me that I think that Mormon named the Book of Mormon not after him, but after this place. And when we hear that name Mormon, he wants us not to think of himself. He wants us to think of the waters of Mormon. Why? Because if we go back to the verse, what happened in the waters of Mormon? there came these people to a knowledge of their Redeemer. Isn't that a perfect description of the book? In the book, people come to a beautiful knowledge of their Redeemer. How beautiful is the Book of Mormon? Because that's where I learned about Jesus. Now, I do have a little backup on this idea. It's from Joseph B. Wirthlin. He said, how marvelous that the Book of Mormon, the most powerful instrument upon the face of the earth today for bringing all who heed its message to the knowledge of their Redeemer, should bear the name of this hallowed place. So I hope that you will, maybe when you see the cover of that Book of Mormon, instead of thinking of Mormon, the prophet who wrote the book, you'll start to think of the place. And what happened there? People came to a knowledge of their Redeemer. They made covenants with him, and it changed the rest of their lives. And to me, that's what the Book of Mormon's done for me. I love it because it's changed me. You know, I might come up to someone and they'll say, I don't think Joseph Smith was a true prophet. Or they'll say, I don't think Brigham Young was a true prophet. Or I don't think the church is true, right? And I might answer back, well, I know Joseph Smith's a prophet, or I know Brigham Young's was a prophet, or I know President Nelson's a prophet, or I know the church is true. And that's great. And they might say, how do you know? You've never met them, right? You've never talked with them. You've never talked to God. How do you know? And I think my answer would be this. I know for a fact, because I was there, that the Book of Mormon changed my life. And no one can say, no, it didn't. I'd say, yeah, it did. I was there. My life was changed. I knew my life would change. I knew God knew my life was changed, and I could not deny it. Does that sound familiar? The Book of Mormon gives us an opportunity to have our own experience with God, to come to a knowledge of our Redeemer. So those of you who are like, I want to have an experience with God, I want to have a strong testimony, then you've got to invest in the Book of Mormon. You have got to say, no more $1 a month, no more $1 a day. I'm investing. I'm putting in a good amount of time, and I'm going to invest in this book, and I'm going to search and search and search till I have my own Waters of Mormon experience in the book. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.